Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 26th and tonight's movie is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. This is another title that's too long, I'm just gonna call it Behind the Mask. This is a black comedy horror slasher movie from 2006 about a guy who aspires to be a horror movie serial killer and invites a documentarian to document his journey into becoming one. And even at the time, this wasn't a new idea for a found footage movie. One of the first found footage movies from the 90s is a Belgian movie called Man Bites Dog, which has the same sort of idea. This movie seems to be very self-aware and like it knows about the horror tropes. It gave me Scream vibes, and that's not a good thing because I hated Scream. I tend to shy away from horror comedies in general, especially the really self-aware ones, because it's kind of easy to be self-aware, but that doesn't mean that you're automatically funny. But I picked this movie because it had good reviews, and I wanted to see what it was like. Who knows, maybe this will be what Scream was trying to be. There's only one way to find out, so I'm gonna go give it a watch. Behind the Mask was weird. Good, but weird. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. One very important thing to know about this story's world building is that it takes place in a fictional universe where I assume all those slasher movies, but at least Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and Halloween were actual real things that happened. So this is actually a movie where the horror movie tropes apply to real life because that is the real life. Which does explain a lot of the foolishness in this movie, but not all of it. It's never said exactly how this came to be, but it just starts out with Leslie Vernon is planning his big night, the night that's essentially a horror movie, and will bring him into infamy right up there with Krueger and Myers. And there's a documentary film crew of 3 grad students, 1 woman and 2 men, who are documenting this and interviewing him and stuff like that. Once again, there is no explanation for how this came to be, we're just supposed to accept it. This movie is not complete mockumentary. It keeps going back and forth between the mockumentary, the documentary that the characters are filming, and a third-person sort of view that actually is in the style of a horror movie. I liked the acting in this movie a lot. There are 2 main characters in this movie. The first is Leslie Vernon himself, and the actor who they got to play him, just like, slow claps for this guy. He was so entertaining. He's so passionate about his craft. And so psychotic to have this be his craft. But he takes everything about this very seriously. The other main character is one of the documentarians named Taylor, and she is the one who's like the host. She's doing the interviews, she's doing the narration, stuff like that. Her character was a little bit harder to grasp because she seems to have some sort of ethical code, but she also agrees to do this. And she takes so much longer than most people would to actually try to do something to stop it from happening. And I just remember this right now. There is a pretty big name in this, Robert Englund, who is very well known as the actor behind Freddy Krueger. And he plays a good guy in this movie. Let's also talk about the self-awareness and dark humor of this movie. Compare this to Scream. Scream was a crappy slasher movie that kept, like, elbowing the audience in the ribs, saying, it's like, we're self-aware, trash. Sorry if you like that movie, I just really did not like Scream. This is more like a loving tribute to horror tropes. It's silly, and it knows it's being silly, but there's something very earnest about it, too. But I think that most of the points docked come from the way that the final act played out. Plus, and I know that I'm being the worst for saying this, the world building and internal logic of this movie doesn't add up at a lot of points. They clearly establish that these, what we think of as movies, were actual events that happened in their reality, and that's further emphasized that these are not movies because one of the actors who plays Freddy Krueger, one of the killers that Leslie Vernon looks up to and is trying to emulate, is one of the people in this movie. So, why do they know all the horror tropes so well? It's not like they saw it the way that you would see a horror movie. They would have just, like, read about it. Or saw it on the news or something. They wouldn't have a play-by-play of how it went down. I guess we're just not supposed to think about that very hard, and, you know, that's not too much of a stretch. This movie is very silly in a lot of ways. But Leslie Vernon himself is the star of the show. He's not exactly scary, but he is very funny and very entertaining. There were a few moments in this movie that made me laugh. Not a lot that made me feel really scared, but it's mostly a black comedy. Anyway, now I want to talk about some spoilers. So, it's after the first 3 kills in Leslie's plan that Taylor decides, no, we need to stop this. And I think the implication is that since they are technically horror movie characters in their reality, they do make dumb decisions. But in this movie, instead of the film crew, driving away to a place that has reception and calling the police, they try to go in and tell all the people inside this house, all these high schoolers, that there's this guy trying to kill all of them. And we know this because we've been following him stalk you for the past several days, and we know his exact plan to murder each and every one of you except maybe that one girl. And here's something else they never even discuss doing. There's 10 of them. They could scatter in different directions. There's only one killer. They know this. But whatever, right away, cracks seem to be forming in Leslie's master plan, and you saw how much effort he put into it, so it's weird. First of all, the survivor girl that he had set his sights on turns out to not fit the bill perfectly. She's not a virgin, which I guess is one of the main things. She does seem kind of bookish, but she's not a virgin, and apparently that matters a lot. Then steps in the plan start changing orders, and things don't happen the way that they thought they did, and eventually it becomes clear that the actual plan was something that the film crew never knew about, and the actual plan took their betrayal into account. The real survivor girl is not the original high schooler, it's Taylor. And instead of, I don't know, running away, she decides to fully embrace the role and play into his master plan. Why? I don't know, I guess she just didn't fill in her dumb quota for the day. This is especially weird because there are these 2 characters that sort of serve as a mother and father figure to Leslie. We know that the man was a horror movie serial killer. We don't really know about the wife. It's implied that she's definitely okay with all of this and very encouraging. But he said the main thing to do to get away is to run fast, run straight, run far, don't look back, and keep going until the sun's up. And they told that to the film crew specifically, and they never think of actually doing it. I mean, one guy does try to escape, but he falls over and Leslie just kills him. Anyway, the final showdown does happen as planned, exactly the same way that Leslie laid out it would happen, except with a different horror movie survivor, and it ends up with her getting the upper hand, subduing Leslie, hitting him with his sickle and stabbing him with it, and then shoving his head into an apple press and cranking it up. You'd think that she would just keep cranking until there was no room for doubt anymore, but instead she decides to just light the entire barn on fire. And if there's anything the Halloween movie from 2018 has taught us, is that burning fires against trapped serial killers don't seem to be all that effective. I actually didn't know that when I reviewed it for the 2019 Horror Nights, and if I had known about it, it would have gotten a 6 or a 5 instead of a 7, because that is just so dumb. Surprise, surprise, he does survive. The post-credits scene is the autopsy being done. He literally just sits up and this burnt, charred corpse remains. I was kind of expecting the movie to go Leslie's master plan sort of banks on these people acting like stupid horror movie characters, and they don't. I mean, there are a few moments of really good self-awareness about that. Someone's they're we need this survivor girl to rise up, save the day, and defeat Leslie. And then Taylor's this girl is 17 years old. Overall, while it is still leaps and bounds above Scream, I didn't love this movie. I thought it was good for what it was, but horror comedies really aren't my thing that much. Usually you would have to go complete full camp like Evil Dead 2 or something, and this one, kind of tried to have it both ways sometimes. Still, it's a lot smarter than I was expecting it to be. Anyway, thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.